Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on this journey of this show that is designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show along with Craig Brown, an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm great, Tom. It's good to hear your voice. It's winter, in case you didn't notice.
It is winter, and we are wrapping up 2019. We started this show 6 months ago, and we are still here, and we're making plans for 2020. So we survived the first 6 months, Craig.
Yeah, actually, we're getting interesting feedback, too. I still remember the feedback about Celebrity from somebody in Japan. It was just off the wall. I haven't found a better one yet, though a lot of younger folks have been saying, thanks for doing this. So we're getting steam here. It's really good.
Well, it's really interesting because someone I knew through a different part of my life works in and around PLM, and he was searching for podcasts and came across this one. He goes, you don't come from this world. What are you doing hosting this show? And he like saw my name and he was like, what the heck are you doing that? And I go, hey, I'm there to have some fun with Craig. That's why I do the show. Yeah.
Well, and hopefully he listened to a few or
he did.
Our titles and other things, so he can figure out which ones he wants to listen to. I think we've now posted 24, maybe 25. I know we recorded a few more.
Well,
so it's really fun.
And he did listen to it, and he said, hey, it's a really good show for people in the space. So that kind of made my day.
Okay.
Nobody called me a celebrity like they called you, Craig.
Well, I think that guy was, English was not his native language. He was searching for the right word to use, and it was fun for the moment that it lasted.
Craig, you are a celebrity to me. So
no nonsense.
So each week, Craig and I try to bring to this show interesting interviews and other ideas that will help all the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And as we wrap up 2019, we're going to do that today. And we have a special guest. We have Don Haupt, and he is a retired executive from Caterpillar. When he retired, he was the technical, I'm going to mess up his title, but he was in charge of PLM and engineering systems. And he had a long career at Caterpillar. But the interesting thing is, I don't know, about a decade ago, he met Craig Brown, and they didn't work in competitive companies. And so they've been able to, throughout their careers, really partner and share and help each other with their jobs in this crazy world of PLM. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But Don, before we get started, why don't you get your title right, since I messed it up, and tell everybody kind of what your background was and what led you into this world.
Sure. Thanks, Tom and Craig. It's good to be with you again. Always a pleasure for a couple of old sages to get together and talk about the subject of PLM. My official title was Technical Steward, and I was responsible for PLM and engineering systems for Caterpillar, and just a fancy way of saying that I was helping set the strategy and the direction for where Caterpillar should go in the future, on how we wanted to deal with creating information and sharing it across the worldwide enterprise of product development within the company. My total time with Cat was about 35 years. That's a number you don't hear very often anymore, but it was a good career. I'll be honest with you, I bled yellow when I was born because my father worked for Caterpillar as well. And he was also a mechanical engineer, and so it was just kind of in the bloodline for me to end up there.
So that's actually really interesting that you were with that one company for 35 years, because as you said, that's not really common these days. What do you think the advantage was, kind of, being a little bit more silver grade sage, to staying with one company for 35 years?
Well, I think some of it's generational. I'll peel back a couple more layers of the onion here. I actually worked for Caterpillar 3 times. And I worked in the old foundry during the summer between my junior and senior years of college on a place called the Melt Deck. And to be right honest, that's as close to hell as I ever want to get. There were like 12 furnaces burning at any one time, and my job was to skim the slag off the top of them and pour the iron out into the ladles that were taking it to the mold lines. And it was a very interesting place. You could feel what you were breathing some nights.
For all you guys out there listening who are software geeks, you really need to spend a day in a foundry. It opens your eyes to very, very, very different things. And it's interesting. At GM, we had engine foundries, casting foundries, just like CAT, though ours were a whole lot smaller. It's eye-opening. Just what you got to do to get the job done.
I've never been in such a place like that. And as you were saying it, my first reaction was yuck. And then as you were done, I thought, I want to go spend the day in a foundry.
Well,
it's amazing.
It's an experience. You really couldn't pay me enough to go back, but the experience I got was absolutely invaluable. And it was, it gave me some eye-opening experiences. As Craig said, it convinced me, if I wasn't convinced already, that, I'm going back to school and getting my degree so I don't have to spend my career here. And it launched me into the area that I'm in and eventually retired from. I went back to CAT after college and started my career there. Again, for you, the young guys that are listening, it was one of these very archaic devices called a drawing board that I did all my design on and the detailed drawings and things that we worked with. I remember seeing the first CAD terminal come into CAT, and we all thought, man, this is really space age. This is really, really cool. I branched out from doing just design work into doing the very early forms of finite element analysis, and began to form this idea that design and analysis can work together here. Why do we have designers doing design work and the test guys doing test work and the analysis guys doing analysis work, and nobody's really talking to each other? And to be right honest, I did that for about 5-6 years, and the Caterpillar just wasn't pushing the envelope very far. And so I left CAT looking for some experience to be able to do that. And I ended up at an automotive supplier in South Bend, Indiana. It was called Bendix Automotive, and their chassis and brake components division for a couple of years, and was doing exactly that. I was building models and correlating some of that to some of the test results and things that were going on. But to be right honest, I knew I wasn't going to spend my career there. For a kid that was quite happy with a large pile of dirt in all my matchbox cars and trucks, my heart was in large equipment. And after I was at Bendix for a couple of years, to be sure, Caterpillar tracked me down and said, "Hey, would you like to come back? We're starting this new group that's going to work on some really large mining equipment, and we want to do verification by analysis on that." And so that led me back to Caterpillar. You just run the timeline out. We did that. We learned a lot. We were fighting limits of computing systems as we progressed. Throughout my career, I just started learning all kinds of things. I began to get the responsibility for even the CAD systems and how we released drawings, how we did drawings, and how we created information. And lots of people used to joke I did myself. I was responsible for everything else, everything that nobody else wanted to deal with. And come about, what was it, 2000, 2001, I think, Craig, we started to call that PLM.
Well, somebody did. I kept wondering what the P meant, but that'll come up later probably.
And so I find myself, here I am in this position of tech steward, trying to lead our company, and what are we wanting to do here, and recognizing that a lot of the systems that we use were very archaic, very mainframe-based systems that really housed, if you will, the crown jewels for the company on engineering information. Mm-hmm. What would happen if that crashed and we couldn't get it back? So we were wanting to move into the future and learn how we could manage this information better and kind of be an industry leader, a thought leader in that. And Caterpillar's not the only company in the world that was doing that, and so started looking for some other people, and through an organization called SimData, I got introduced to this old crusty guy named Craig Brown. And if you could see us, you'd be surprised. We both have glasses. We both have a little bit of gray hair. We both have beards.
And we both look better in retirement than we did the last year before retirement. But maybe we should find those pictures and send them out to everybody.
I think, yeah. But we started talking, and because we weren't competitors, we could talk a little bit more freely. And we started joining forces and communicating and getting together to just have some conversations about how are you dealing with this problem? How are you solving it? What do you seeing going on in the automotive industry?
Yeah.
And that friendship just blossomed, and it developed into an organization that Craig and I called the OEM Council, or Original Equipment Manufacturing Council, and we asked several others to join. And Craig, I don't know if you want to add a little bit of color to that, but kind of the rest is history after that.
Well, it's kind of a secret society, unfortunately.
Well, Craig, wait a second. Why don't we back up and take advantage of this?
Okay.
Why don't we back up and talk about how did you get into this PLM world? I don't think we've talked about this on the show.
Well, so I'm an aerospace engineer by training, and I joined the world of embedded controls, so a computer controlling an aircraft or a spacecraft in the early 1980s. As an aerospace engineer, though, I had a mechanical engineering training, electrical engineering training, as well as this stuff that we then called software, and there weren't software companies yet. Just look at the timeline. As General Motors got into digital controls of cars, so that's a throttle body, so fuel injection stuff now, and some of the radio stuff, they came to the company I worked for, which is doing computers for NASA and computers for defense, and said, hey, you guys do computers. We work together in the Apollo program. That's a different story for a different day. People can look that up online if they'd like. And we need your help doing this embedded software thing inside of cars. And so I became an application engineer, moved back to the Midwest, which is where I'm from. And before you knew it, I was doing all kinds of embedded software. General Motors decided to insource embedded software as we spun off component divisions. And, we spent 10 years doing that, first at Powertrain and then at the broader part of the company. Like anybody's career, you start to evolve and you say, well, okay, I've done that. Let's try something else. And because of the aerospace background, I was asked to take on simulation methods, which is what introduced me first to SimData and a few other companies. And this was about, well, how do we do simulation? And to Don's point, get it off the mainframes and get it into modern compute technology. Today, you'll read about high performance computing, and a lot of us have bought a lot of those computers to do simulation. And just recently, I listened into the Amazon conference, which was held a week and a half ago. And it was really interesting. They're now providing to any of us. And Don and I, we were joking the other day about we could start a company now because we could just buy some HPC bandwidth rather than build our own compute farms. So computers have just changed dramatically, and they keep changing. This thing called Product Lifecycle Management has benefited. It's also been slowed down now and then, and it's part of that. So my interest, if you want to ask one thing, what is common in my career through all these different challenges? Oh, it's the application of computers to what we do in this world, whether you use them and you don't know you use them, like your cell phones and your cars, or whether you have a desktop like we're using today to help do these recordings, right? So I'm still fascinated by that, even though I retired from full-time work, and it's part of why I'm doing the Digital Enterprise Society.
Well, the two of you have done about the worst job of retirement of anyone I've ever seen, because
well, that's just, I have a different position, Tom. I think the word retirement is all miscast. We need to melt it down like that foundry that Don talked about and skim off the slag, these assumptions that you just don't do anything anymore, and pour it into some mold. As you know, Tom, and Don's helping with this, by the way, we're finding a new mold. We're going to define a new thing, and I think this is a good way to think about the Digital Enterprise Society. That's why we're interested, right? That's why we're taking the time. So,
yeah. And it's. I don't like the word retirement. I like repurpose, because we just found a different way to apply the skills and the experience that we had. And Tom, you asked me what's the advantage of being at a place for 35 years. To be right honest, I just started last week, and here I am 35 plus years later. Now I'm 3 years retired from that place, and where did the time go? But you look back at it, I stuck with it for a couple of key reasons. I liked what I was doing, and all the politics and things aside from the corporate world, they're always there. It was challenging work. It was fun work. The people were good. The products were fun to be a part of, and you wanted to see it through as far as you could. And just like I said, all of a sudden, here I am at 35 years, and okay, it's time for the next chapter in life.
So you guys talked about that you met through like the sim data world, and you weren't competitors, and so you were able to talk freely about some of the things that you were doing inside your companies. Can you give some examples of how that type of friendship, that type of partnership, actually how you were able to work together and make it a better work product for both of you in your own worlds?
Well, I remember the first meeting. So the sim data guy, our account guy, he comes up and he says, "Hey, there's these guys from Caterpillar that want to talk to you, and why don't we meet?" It was one of these conference centers in the Detroit area. Why don't we meet? Because they're here at our conference this week. And I'm like, okay, sure. Little did I know. I mean, the reason why was I at the conference? I was there to do benchmarking, right? That was one of my assignments. I had just wrapping up this simulation thing, building new kinds of simulation methods. And now I was asked to get into this PLM space and make sense of it. And partly, to be candid with everybody, it wasn't about making PLM better. It was about how to bring in the embedded software community into PLM. What you now hear in the literature and the broadcast as application lifecycle management and product lifecycle management. All right, so I said, well, sure, because I can check the box and start my benchmarking exercise, right? And then I, the more we talked and we were organized the same way in that we were a partnership of an engineering leader and an IT leader. And so the first thing that impressed me was, oh, they're just like us, right? And then we got to talking about, well, what are the challenges? We were always frustrated with sales guys that overpromise, and then they blame their product guys for under-delivering. And, it seems a little unfair to the product guys. Maybe we should have just had the product guys in the meeting to begin with. So like every partnership, first we got to know each other and we said, well, how do we go forward? And we just decided to talk off and on about quarterly. And then eventually we visited each other and spent a few days. And we did that a couple times. And then, we started talking about our problems. And one of my biggest problems was, how do you get a corporation the size of a Caterpillar or a General Motors to do proper or better or any governance of how you invest your money for PLM? And lo and behold, in like 5 minutes, Don pulls out this slide and says, well, this is what we do. And I'm like, oh, great, I can follow it. Well, I think he knows this whole story, maybe not. Sure enough, I took it, I put it into GM parlance, and then if you recall the timing now, this is 2008, GM was going through a very severe financial restructuring, bankruptcy, the whole thing. And the leadership I worked for at the time, they're like, oh, cool, you got benchmarking from CAT, you we got to govern this thing. Sure, we'll sit all the vice presidents down and you get an hour to explain to them why we're going to do this. And I was on cloud nine. I was like, wow, here I am, a little cog in the big wheel, and all of a sudden, so we found common problems that we could help each other with. And there was a few years later, we all met in Peoria. We invited the Sim Data guys, and we were talking about a particular vendor problem, and we shared the same problem space. And Tom, we've interviewed the Eris guys on this program. That's how I got to know Eris. So it was this partnership with Don, and when necessary, we brought in other experts, and it worked. And then Don mentioned just a little bit ago this council that we formed. We said, well, if it's working for the two of us, why don't we make it a bit broader? And so we did that. And what I found about teams, and that's why I think it's good to talk about this at the end of our first 6 months. What made it a lasting partnership? Well, each of us kept getting something, right? In my case, solving a particular governance problem, collective influence, Don mentioned, right? And at times that worked, and frankly, there were a couple times it didn't work. But we didn't dissolve the partnership. We kept debating with each other. We even got, and I'm very proud of this, on the one of the members that joined us was in fact Ford. And oh geez, Ford and GM were competitors. We won't share anything. Well, when it comes to tools and when it comes to PLM, we had more in common than in discommon. And so you just got to work hard at finding these partnerships where you can work together and not challenge your competitive advantage. It's been interesting, the evolution of the team. Neither one of us are on it anymore because it's a company-led thing, right? And since we're retired, neither one of us go to the meetings. But as far as I understand it, they continue to meet. And so, it's a partnership of common interest. The common interest there is PLM, and in particular, big users of the Siemens tool set.
Don, do you have any stories of sort of how this partnership / friendship has benefited your career?
Yeah, it's Craig was looking for something in particular, like the governance model that he explained. What benefited me a lot was I had to fight a lot of turf battles. Believe it or not, in large corporations, there's turf battles that you have to deal with, and I'm sure everyone's going to be shocked. One of those battles tends to be between the manufacturing community and the engineering and product development community. And Caterpillar does they do a lot of very innovative things, but they're also very methodical, and they think about how they're going to do this and make sure it's going to be successful before they really jump into it. And the PLM space was no different. They really wanted, I needed to be able to show that Caterpillar was not necessarily on the bleeding edge of this technology. As new technologies come into play, and it's no different for whatever it is, someone's got to be the first one in the room and try it out. And a lot of times there's some things that go well, but there's a lot of things that don't go well. And to be honest, with some of the initial tries at the primary vendor that we had used, it didn't go so well. Some of it was the technology itself. A lot of it was the process that we were using. But I needed some partners in the room that were, quite honest, some big players. So I could go in and say, look, we're not in this alone. GM is doing the same thing. Ford is doing the same thing. I won't mention some of the other companies that were in there just because I'm not sure that would be appropriate. But I had a group of friends, if you will, that we could collaborate and say, yep, here's how we're doing this, and those that wanted to question sometimes my sanity would ask, well, who else is doing this? And I had the data to say, here's who else is doing this, and this is how they're accomplishing it. So let's move forward together. And that was very, very beneficial for me.
One of the measures of a lasting partnership is just when you hit one of those moments where there's a lot of stress in the room, either because the users of a, in this case, users of a particular thing, we're all ganging up on the guy who built it and saying, hey, you didn't build it good enough. Or conversely, we're coming from different industries and we're driven by different priorities, right? And so the poor tool guy, he's sitting there going, well, which one of you do I serve? And of course, we all answer mine. And so the ability to get a group of us together to make some maybe compromises, or at least have the debate about, what's coming next. Is it really machine learning and augmented reality and all? Those are the big topics today, or is it something else? That's another measure of a lasting partnership, is that you can have these discussions and you don't have to agree. And I think I don't even know how we did it, but it must have worked because people were willing to be a bit more open. We didn't publish. This is one of the reasons we kept it private, was so we could have these blunt discussions, but not publish it or embarrass anybody or whatever. So It's interesting. Now, it's interesting. These partners, they learned something. They also applied the learning to their individual companies, right? And so I don't want anybody listening to think, oh, a lasting partnership means you always agree. In fact, you may just appreciate each other's differences more, and that's important to appreciate the differences. Another thing that happens in lasting, well, and then Don and I have reached the age where you get ready to not work at the primary company anymore, and you recast this thing called retirement. He was a year or so ahead of me, and I had no plans to retire this early. And then as the fortunes of GM changed and my own life choices, I looked to him as a coach for retirement. I'm like, yeah, and I didn't listen, by the way. He
yeah, you did.
but what was interesting was just we were there, and we had people that know PLM World well, they know that we were both board members, right? And so, interestingly enough, we showed up in a different forum, and we already had this partnership, if you will. We knew each other, and so as PLM World evolved, and now the Digital Enterprise Society, we've been asked back a couple times. We're neither one of us is a board member anymore, but we've been asked back a couple of times to provide insight and advice. How would you proceed? This point about partnerships is part of the reason it's in the charter. Is people like Don and I saying it's really important. It's important that you reach out beyond your own department, your own company, to other like-minded folks. You'll find them and share practices.
So that brings up an interesting question. We know a lot of people who listen to this podcast have up-and-coming careers in this world. So what advice would you give, each of you, to someone who they're younger and they're moving forward? They're not the technical steward. They're not the PLM leader. They're have a younger rung on the ladder. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I'll jump in first, Craig. I guess one of the first things I would say would be, all right, I'm a grandfather of 6, all right, and I have 4 children, and so that qualifies me to be kind of an old dad. And so dads always have dadisms. And one of the things that I would always tell my kids, as they started their careers, I said, look, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And particularly, no disrespect to some of the younger generations, but to be right honest, they want it all, and they want it all right now, and they don't want to wait for it. And in some cases, they don't want to work for it. The experience that Craig and I got, we didn't acquire in a couple of years. I've been retired from CAT 35 years. My working career spanned 37 years, and to be right honest, I'm still learning about PLM. You still are acquiring knowledge. And so get the experiences, it's a little bit of where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? And then kind of plot a course to get there, but don't be surprised if it takes some side roads along the way. And if opportunities present themselves, go for it, because that experience is going to help you in the long run to achieve where you want to be once you get to the stage that we're at.
I would like to expand on that. You should take on those assignments that are uncomfortable, and the best coaching I can give everybody is just be curious. If you're a lot of engineers are. If you're a naturally curious person, then try something different, try something new, and especially at a larger corporation, which is my experience. Though I've been in a few smaller companies off and on. At a larger corporation, once you've proven yourself, well, it's like tenure in a university. You might actually be given the free rein to go try something that may not work. But, I think that's one bit of advice of why large companies. Once you've earned your stripes, then, and I don't mean organizational position. I mean more influence, right? Your ability to influence. Then you'll get these other assignments like Don and I had at the end of our careers. They just naturally come to you. Be curious and then reach out. I got to credit the Sim Data guys, and they were just doing what Don asked to get us together. We had the courage to talk about our problems, right? And I think a lot of times, especially younger folks, you think you're not allowed to do that. You be cognizant of law and be cognizant of competitive advantage, but after you get past that, Everything else is fair game, whether it's governance or technology evolution or even retraining the workforce. Part of what we talk about in the Digital Enterprise Society is, no kidding, how do we get the smaller companies to embrace all this digital stuff, right? And I think retraining the workforce is I hope it's a focus next year. We've got to get more attention on that.
So as we go into 2020 and we start into this new year, let's look forward. What changes do you guys see coming? Because, you've been retired, but you're both still learning, you're still active, you're still talking to each other and your other peers. What lies ahead for people who work in PLM?
Don, you go first, because you invited me to that thing we were at earlier this week.
I think as we look into the future, I'll put it this way, just as Caterpillar and I was starting to understand, well, what do we want to do with PLM? The industry trends were to kind of get settled with a key vendor, a key supplier, and build your solution around that, and leverage the things that supplier, that software supplier could do for you, and just kind of power through with them. But where things are going is, yes, you certainly need a backbone to build it on, but integration of multiple tools is the way things are going, and probably from my perspective, a little bit better perspective than just accepting what one supplier has and forcing it to work when it really isn't the right thing. And so process first, always process first. I mean, Craig and I, this is one of the messages that we always preached is understand your process and define what it is you want to do, and then go find the right tool to do it. And one of the key aspects of that tool is, does it play well with others? And so you can bring it in and really build a very, very powerful solution to do that. And as you look at what's happened over the last couple of years, and even where things are going, there's a lot of players in the market. There's a lot of new things coming up, and they're doing some pretty cool stuff. And they're pushing the envelope of what I thought was going to be technically achievable even now. And so, on one hand, it's exciting. That's pretty cool. How are you doing that? How can we take advantage of that? On the other, it's a little bit of, let's see where this goes before I jump into that tool.
Well, and I think, most people now use a web service or the tax preparation folks, right? I still, and it's all really quick, right? And it's all some computer somewhere. I mean, it's cloud-based in today's technology, but the TurboTax phenomena for something complicated like the U.S. tax code is going to happen to engineering. It's already happening, and it's these tool vendors that a lot of the founders of the different companies they've already made their mark somewhere. And then they're just like us, they're a few years younger, and they're like, well, we can do this again. And if you ask, I'm interested in the history side of this. Well, why? Well, because computers are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and they're everywhere. So now you're going to get into an understanding of, well, what can computers do that humans can't? And I would just suggest to everybody listening, you don't underestimate this, right? There are things humans do, cognitive things that involve making choices based upon partial information. Humans are still really good at that compared to computers. But computers are amazingly good and getting cheaper every day at processing humongous amounts of data and finding patterns. And so presenting those patterns, to a human to help the human make better decisions, I think that's we can't predict how that's going to go. Just like people said, you'll never do TurboTax, you'll need people to do your forms, and here we are 10 years after TurboTax is common everywhere. So I think engineers of the future, if you don't use TurboTax for your tax returns today, you ought to do it, because then think about 10 years from now, maybe faster, engineering is going to be the same way. You'll still make important decisions. You need engineers, but you won't be filling out paperwork everywhere. It'll be done for you, right? And even the data farming, what these machine learning guys like to talk about, the data farming, the data parsing. I've been impressed with the simulation vendors. I've been to a couple of them, in the past 6 months here, they're just doing stuff I wouldn't have even imagined. So you sometimes think, well, I'm one of the thought leaders and I can imagine where we're going. Thom, maybe we should just point out we can't imagine everything, any individual. And I read a quote yesterday on the way home, and the quote was interesting to me. You want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, you need a team. I think that's an important point.
Well,
so keep sharing.
and that ties back to sort of the theme of this episode, and that is the importance of lasting partnerships, whether it's inside your company or outside your company. If you want to go far, you got to do it with other people. I believe that. It's what I've taught all through my career when I go into companies and talk about how do you get your teams across the gap from potential to performance. You can't do it alone. We think we live in a Lone Ranger society, but nobody can do it alone. So I think that's a great way to sort of wrap this whole thing up. Do either of you really quick have last words for the listeners?
I'm putting Don on the spot because I'm the co-host, Don.
Yeah, you are. I guess I'd just leave you with the thought that this whole PLM space, there's a lot of, you hear some talk about is PLM dead or where is this going? A lot of companies are saying, well, I did PLM, what's next? This too is a marathon, not a sprint. And PLM is a journey that you're really never going to finish, because as you implement one thing, then you move on to the next. And this whole aspect of information management and sharing is just continuing to grow. And the amount of information that we need to process is going to continue to grow. And so I guess I would say embrace the journey, because it's exciting, it's fun, and just hang on, cinch up your seatbelt, because it's a good ride.
And I would add to our listeners, thanks for joining us in our first 6 months. Enjoy the holidays with your families, and get involved with Digital Enterprise Society come January 2nd, because we are a group of folks that can build partnerships amongst ourselves, and it'll help the world and our professions be really comfortable with where PLM goes next.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Don, thank you for joining Craig and I here on this year-end episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. And for those of you who are listening, please join Craig and I next week, because every single week we have more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.